what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do an introduction about what independent celebrants are and how we work. And the way we work with a family who are organising a funeral is very similar to the way we would work with someone planning their own funeral. We're focusing on funerals as we're part of the Dead Good Festival that's running this week in York. And then Louise is going to talk to you and show you some fabulous photos of some alternative style funerals that she's been involved in. And then Annette is going to go into more detail about planning your own funeral. So that's the plan. We'll see what actually happens. But just a very brief introduction overall. Independent celebrants can work with people to create and lead any kind of ceremony, milestone ceremony, often naming ceremonies, weddings, commitments, vow renewals, and funerals, memorials, scattering or interment of ashes. But it can be anything you want to make into a ceremony. So what does a celebrant do? So in terms of a funeral, we will talk to whoever's organising the funeral, whether that's you in advance or a family member organising it on behalf of someone who's died. And we do this, we'll talk, we'll meet with you in person if possible and listen to what you'd like to do. As Louisa said, there are no absolute fixed rules. There are some regulations about disposing of bodies and where you can bury somebody. But in general, for a ceremony, it can be whatever you want it to be. So a funeral ceremony would be remembering the life that had been lived and celebrating that life. Acknowledging the grief of family and friends around and making sure that the ceremony is whatever you want it to be. We'll write a personalised ceremony that's meaningful because you've helped to create it. And we'll also liaise with funeral directors and anyone else who's involved in the arrangements. And that will depend on the venue as well, who we speak to there. And then the celebrant will lead the ceremony on the day. So can we try and move on? So how does it work? As I said, we'll meet with you and we'll discuss what you'd like. So it might be traditional, it might be alternative, it might be themed. You might want a, you know, theme of your favourite film or whatever. Or if you're a cowboy fan, you might want everyone in Stetsons or something like that. It can be whatever you want it to be. Now, in terms of content, it can be totally secular. It could be semi-religious with an independent celebrant. That's an option. You can include prayers or hymns if you want to do that. It could be more spiritual, so related to the natural world. It could be outdoors, in a woodland. It could be reflecting your beliefs and values. And that's the important thing. It's not about me, it's not about a celebrant, it's not about the funeral director, it's about you and what you believe and want to include. We'll talk about how you'd like your memories to be shared, and Annette will talk a little bit more about that later on. And if you'd like anybody in particular to speak or read at the ceremony, so who you'd want to be involved, and then what you want to include. So this is the same if you're organising your own or somebody else's. And I think most people will recognise the fact that you have music, often have music. It can be any source of music, it can be whatever you want it to be. So we've got a nice picture there of a young man playing the guitar at a funeral. You can have hymns, as I've mentioned before, readings, poetry, prayers. There are so many different poems and readings available online, and people often have their own favourite poems that they might want to include. A key part of a ceremony is often the eulogy or tributes, but you could call it your story as well. So if you're planning your own, you might want to talk about what you'd like to share about your own life that's been lived. Or if you're planning someone else's, it's always good to talk to them in advance about their childhood, things that they've enjoyed doing throughout their life, milestones, things that have meant something to them or you. And then within the ceremony, you can do whatever you want to do. So you might want to light candles in a symbolic way, asking certain people to light a candle or lighting a candle and saying a particular prayer. So for example, next week I'm leading a funeral where we're going to light a candle and do some meditation. Just a few minutes meditation based around the candle. You can have dancing, drama, display paintings of the person who's just died, or that have been painted for them or of them. You can do whatever you want to do. It's becoming more popular now to have cardboard coffins, and they can be decorated individually, either before, during, or even after a ceremony. And you can see there's some young people there who are enjoying being part of a celebration of the life of the person who's died by putting their own message on the top of the coffin during the ceremony. There's so many different things you can do. Basically, it's only limited by your own imagination. As long as it's legal, you can do it. So, when and where? Again, the basic answer to this is anywhere. Most ceremonies at the moment take place at a crematorium or a cemetery. But this is usually during working hours and during the week on weekdays, although some do open at weekends. And it's often time limited, and the time that you have depends on how much you want to spend, because each ceremony is a fixed length, and if you go over that length, you need to pay for a double slot, as they call it. So you have to bear that in mind when planning, that there is limited time if you have it at a crematorium. However, many crematoriums have facilities to live stream so that people can share, as we're doing today, live streaming to anywhere in the world, so that if people can't be there on the day, they can still participate in the ceremony. So you can have a burial at a cemetery. This is less time limited, but it is open to the elements, of course. So bring your wellies and your umbrellas for that. Having said that, there may be a ceremony room at the cemetery that you can use, but usually there's a set time allocated to that. Natural burial grounds are growing more popular, and some of them are in absolutely beautiful settings. And there's various reasons why you might decide to have a natural burial. maybe just to be laid to rest in a peaceful countryside setting, or a woodland, or a meadow. It could be because you're more conscious of environmental impact that other types of burial or cremation have. It may just be more convenience. So some natural burial sites are open at weekends and outside working hours. So that might influence your decision. It may just be to avoid the time restraints of how long the ceremony can be. And it's useful to know that some sites allow the scattering or burial of ashes as well, providing if they're to be interred, they're in an organic container. And we've got some links for you that we'll share, including one for the natural death centre, which has lists of natural burial grounds around the country. Now, you can, of course, hold a ceremony anywhere: hotel, village hall, community centre, your own garden even, either with or without the body being present. It's entirely up to you. If the body isn't present, then it's classed as a memorial ceremony, but it can help to have a memorial ceremony. You can hold it anywhere with as many people, with a venue that will hold as many people as are coming, that's suitable for that, especially if there's a lot of people going to be there, because getting a crematorium with enough space is really difficult. But it's also nice if it's going to be a small ceremony. It's more intimate and relaxed. And you can, if the deceased has already been cremated, have the ashes present during the memorial. So we've talked a little bit about ashes, etc. So a scattering or interment of ashes can follow a more traditional funeral, or perhaps a small funeral where just very close family have been, or friends. And again, it can be as informal or formal as you wish. Readings of poems, perhaps something read at the funeral if there was one. And a celebrant again comes in here by making it personal, and it can be whatever you want it to be, and it can be wherever you want it to be. So we'll look at where. So as long as you've got the landowner's permission, you can scatter ashes anywhere. A popular place is the memorial garden at a crematorium or cemetery, but it could be your own garden, or on a family grave, again with permission. It could be in a woodland, on the sea. It can be anywhere, lots of different places. And I think Annette's going to talk a little bit more about types of ceremony and how things can be arranged in terms of burial or interment of ashes. So again, a cemetery, burial ground, or a graveyard by arrangement. And some places do allow you to inter ashes at a family grave. So they'll dig out a small area of the grave to place the container with ashes in. Or again, in a natural burial site. Now, just before I move on, I just wanted to mention something that's very much in vogue at the moment, direct cremation. And lots of funeral directors and organisations are offering this. But not everybody knows what it actually means. So a direct cremation is one that takes place without any mourners present. Now, some people choose it because they prefer not to have a coffin at the ceremony, so then they'll have a memorial ceremony following it. And it's quite popular around the world, actually, certainly in America. this is a popular thing to do. Some people choose it because it's less expensive. And as I've mentioned before, you can have your ceremony anywhere you want to after the direct cremation. So that's useful to think about. But it is important to know that if you do choose direct cremation, then it means that it happens with no mourners present, just the funeral director at the crematorium. So how do you find a celebrant? If you decide you would like to have a celebrant to lead your ceremony, how do you find one? A lot of celebrants are introduced to families through the funeral director. And a good funeral director will match the celebrant and the family or the person organising the funeral. They'll know the celebrants that they use and hopefully choose one of them who they feel is right for the person or the family. Not all funeral directors do this, unfortunately. And if you are in the position where you're organising a funeral and you're not happy with the celebrants, then you can ask to be in touch with another celebrant if you don't gel. Hopefully you will, because the celebrants are definitely people persons, but you never know. You can also find celebrants on the internet by searching celebrants nearby. Many celebrants are on Google Business, so they pop up. But it's worth scrolling through a little bit, not just taking the first person who does pop up. Have a look at the website, and then you'll get a feel of what sort of person that celebrant is and whether they fit with you or not. Again, have a chat with them on the phone, and if you feel that you have a connection, then meet up with them and see. But never be frightened to say, actually, I don't think this is right for me. You can use a celebrant directory. So, for example, Louisa and I both belong to the Association of Independent Celebrants, and Annette belongs to the Institute of Civil Funerals, Civil Celebrants rather, and they have lists of their members. The advantage of using a celebrant from an organisation like that is that they have the third-party liability insurance cover as well, which you might not think is important, but it can be if things go awry. Now, the other advantage there is, for example, the Association of Independent Celebrants offer ongoing professional development training as well, so that the celebrant's up to date and knowledgeable about what's going on in the area of funerals and other celebrants ceremonies. Sorry. There is a national qualification available, and there are other training, good training packages around. So you can ask about training. However, some celebrants have learnt on the job and are very experienced, because celebrancy is a fairly new occupation. It only really started in the last 20 odd years. And so some people became celebrants before the training was in place. So it doesn't mean that they're not very good. In fact, they could be extremely experienced, having learnt on the job. So we'll share the links that we've got later about that. In fact, they're on here, but I won't go through them. And links for planning a funeral. And that's me. So I shall hand over to Louisa.
So my name is Louisa Starr. I'm independent celebrant based in York. I've been doing this job for 8 years now. I do funerals and weddings and the odd naming ceremony. Basically, since I started the role, I've found that my niche is in the alternative side of things. I have a very, very strong opinion that each ceremony should be different because everybody is different. So I'm not a big fan and supporter of the cut and paste procedure that some people and some celebrants, officiants do, because everybody is unique, and so their funeral ceremony should be exactly that as well. So I have 100% guarantee that every single ceremony of mine is started from scratch, with even the first line is always different. I don't tend to do the "Good morning, everybody, we're here to remember the life of," because you're immediately, people will switch off. I have started ceremonies with words that you would not expect to say at a funeral, where we've started with, and in the words of Barry, "You can all fuck off," because that is what Barry used to say, and everybody will straight away go, "Yep, that was Barry." And that, to me, is the key. Is if you see people nodding their heads going, "That was him," that's exactly what it should be. Sometimes even the factual lists of ceremonies where people have written eulogies where it says they did this job, and then they retired. Those are lovely facts to remember, especially if their career was a big part of their lives. But also their personalities are what people will remember the most. So that's a lot what I concentrate on. So in this first photograph here, that is, as Anne-Marie's already said, obviously about scattering ashes. That did happen quite a bit over the last 2 years because of the lovely COVID that we obviously all had to go through, which affected funerals in such a massive way. It was heartbreaking at times for families and for people, friends, everybody. But the scattering of ashes, I've done a few services where we've used it just like a funeral service. It's been not just a few words, it's been a full-on celebration of somebody's life that we've gone through from start to finish. But that obviously was the circumstances that we had with COVID as well. But as Anne-Marie obviously has already explained about scattering of ashes, it can be done anywhere as long as you have the right permission. Some people don't get the permission, but that's not my fault. So from the more alternative point of view, I promote massively having funeral ceremonies, memorial ceremonies, scatterings in a venue that is not a crematorium. Basically, again, one of my strong principles is I'm not a big fan of the fact that in some crematoriums you get 20 minutes. How you can sort of celebrate someone's life in 20 minutes is quite difficult. And so I like to work with families and friends and people that want to have a ceremony in a different location. We've had it in, as Anne-Marie said, back gardens, village halls. I was in a hotel yesterday on the outskirts of York. This photograph is taken at York Cemetery. So York Cemetery is one of the only 2 independent cemeteries in the country. All the rest are government council run. But York Cemetery is a fine example because it's run by the friends of and from individual sponsors and donations. So they allow you to use the space as long as you want and do what you want in there. Well, yeah, obviously not damage the place too much, so the cemetery is a good example of somewhere that you can do an alternative ceremony. This here is just a picture of a ceremony that was done at a spring equinox, because the person that we were remembering was a big believer in the pagan equinox and the solstice. And we did a lot of different rituals that basically celebrated their beliefs it was it was outdoors because obviously it was all to do with nature. That's me raising a bottle of Corona there because that's what the person's favourite drink was. And so raising a toast to someone, it is only a tiny thing to add to a ceremony, but it makes a huge difference in that everyone that remembers them for, yeah, they always have a bottle of Corona in their hand. So let's have them. And it doesn't bother me whatsoever. I quite like that. I have done raising, we've had shots before, we've had downing pints to celebrate someone's life because that's what they were known for. It's only trinket things, but it makes that ounce of personal difference to it. And obviously, I'll never say no to a drink. Oops, hang on, there we go. So this photograph is taken from Nikki's funeral service, which was in September last year. Nikki had been diagnosed with cancer, and I met her 6 months, yeah, it was 6 months before, because Nikki had said to her family she wanted to plan her funeral, and her family were extremely supportive, as were all of her friends, which she had a great deal of. So I went and met Nikki and we sat down and we went through basically her life. So I got to know who she was, what she was like. I had conversations with her and her family and friends in the room, but also with Nikki on her own, so that I could get to the gist of what each of them thought and what Nikki wanted. So Nikki wanted the dress code for the day to be witches, because that's what Nikki loved. She loved her fairy tales. She loved her witches. She loved goblins and elves, pixies, all of the fantasy worlds. And as you can see on her coffin there are crystals, because she was a collector of crystals and she believed in the healing powers of crystals as well. So one of Nikki's wishes for her service was that we started the ceremony with what is called the smudge, which comes from actually native Indian tradition, for obviously clearing all the spirits and having this, well, the space that was here, the cemetery, of all spirits to be clear of evil spirits and have an open space for everybody to feel welcome, which they did. Now, Nikki's service was slightly unique. Well, all services should be unique in that I wrote it in the style of a fairy tale, because that is what she loved. Fairy tales were what she told her grandchildren every time she saw them, what she loved to listen to, what she loved to read herself. But obviously, as we're talking about all these practical things you can do for a funeral, the place, the colours, the decorations, to me, still the fundamental point that lots of people seem to still not address of it is the words, and the contextualisation of those words is, to me, one of the most fundamental points of the funeral ceremony, because that's what people listen to. Music is also a key element. If you're planning your own funeral service and you know what funeral songs you want, that is brilliant. Because imagine if you leave it to someone, a partner, a friend, blimey, they could pick you anything. I mean, if I left it to my husband, God knows what I would get, because it would we don't share the same music tastes at all, strangely enough. But music is one of the most powerful and meaningful parts of a service. Lyrics as well as the melodies make a massive difference. But to me, the words are as important as the rest of the planning, because it is all about what is said about that person. Obviously, the combination of having colours and nice decorations and the atmosphere makes a difference, but it's that big combination of creating something that is totally unique, because everybody is unique. This is at the end of Nikki's funeral ceremony, and the hearse, as you can see, is just behind us because she wasn't being buried at the cemetery. She was being taken up to the crematorium, but she didn't want anybody to go with her for that part. But what she did want is for everybody to line up outside, which we did, and she wanted everybody to walk, the three of us, this is the funeral director and her daughter, to walk clapping to the theme of Ghostbusters. And so literally that, I have got a film of it. If you go onto my YouTube page, you can see what us doing this. And it literally was, everybody was just clapping like this, singing Ghostbusters as we walked out, which was Nikki's wish. And everybody said, that was Nikki, that was Nikki. That's what she would have done. And that to me is, as soon as anyone says to me at the end of a ceremony, that was them, then I know I've done my job. There's the back of us, basically, yeah. As Anne-Marie also mentioned as well, for memorial services, having the person's ashes with us still means it is similar to a funeral because they are with us for that ceremony, even though it's officially called a memorial. This one here for Linda's was actually bought by the family from India. That's why it was hand carved, and it was absolutely gorgeous to look at. But oh, and some cakes. So this is just to reiterate that you can have a funeral ceremony and a memorial ceremony wherever you like, which means you can choose the catering, which means this catering was because Linda loved tea cake, what do you call it, afternoon tea. So she had afternoon tea for her memorial. The chosen venue for this, for example, was the yurts, Salix Yurts, which is in York, just on Wigginton Road. But the family, it's not a great photo there. The table there has actually got Linda's tapestry from her lounge. That was her favourite decoration that they actually brought into the venue, and her favourite rug you can see on the floor there as well. So everything was done to make it absolutely Linda and totally personal as well. And as Anne-Marie said before, because we weren't short with the time, we didn't have to rush everything. We could totally basically tell all the stories we wanted to. Where's my arrow again? There it is. About Linda's life, and there she is, bless her. There was a lovely story of why the blackbird is there, because the blackbird, her family kept seeing blackbirds after the day she passed away, and they'd never seen blackbirds ever in their garden. It was one of those little stories. Oh, there you go, there I am. Yes. This was Lee's service. So Lee was sadly only in his 40s. Sorry, beg your pardon, late 30s. Now their family chose to have this service because there was about 300 people that were coming, because he was such a young man and he was part of the I will get told off if I said rollerblading community, which don't mention skaters in front of rollerbladers. That's, I got told that, and don't mention skateboarding in front of rollerbladers. So for his service, they actually had a whole stream of rollerblading friends come in front of the hearse, which was a very moving moment indeed. But in terms of what we were talking about, coffins, so, and his was made out of very, very strong cardboard, but because he was part of a community that where graffiti is a massive part of their culture, as it were, that coffin was painted by a graffiti artist that took 6 hours to paint, but it was just exactly what he would have loved and what his family and his friends said was just him. And those were his rollerblades that were put there. And there was a lovely moment in the end of this service in that his favourites, one of his songs, which wasn't his song actually, it was his mum's song, was, I don't know if you ever know, it's called By Rusted Roots, sort called Send Me On The Way. And they'd asked for everybody to be up dancing. So literally, I have again got a film on YouTube of it. We had everybody just up dancing at the end, and it was really moving. Dancing is actually something you can do in a funeral service. Last week we did the conga at the end of the funeral service for a young lad, bless him, he was only in his 30s, who'd had difficulties in his life, and his body hadn't been born with the best health. But he loved dancing and loved the conga, so his family said, we really should do the conga. Can we do it? I said, of course we can. We can't not do it. But watching us try to do the conga in York Crematorium was absolutely comical. Especially the look on the crematorium's staff face. It was like, what the hell are you doing now? It was quite funny because they're still maybe a bit more reserved than maybe I. This was actually last week. This was, unfortunately, again, a gentleman only in his 40s that passed away. His wife chose to have, this is called Deaton Lodge, which is just on the Selby Road. They chose to have the date of the service on May the 4th because he was a Star Wars fan. And they chose Deaton Lodge so that they could make it a full day, more or less. So they hired, I think I've got a photo of it there. There I am having pizza. They hired the pizza van so that everybody could celebrate his love of pizza. But what they did is, as you can see, set the room out so that it was quite informal but very relaxed. And what we did for that service was, I obviously wrote a ceremony for it, but in the middle section, what we did was an open mic, which meant we just literally passed the mic and said, is there anybody that would like to say words about Aubrey? And we went on for quite a while. It was not short. As soon as one person started, you couldn't shut the rest of them up. And the hands were going up in the air. Yes, I've got something to say. And it was lovely because they were all different sides of his life. There were his work colleagues, his friends from school, his friends from university, his friends from running club. They all had different stories about him, but they all got to say something. It did mean the service went on for quite a while. It was about an hour, which does sound long term in a funeral service compared to the 20-minute service you have at a crematorium. But to me, an hour is sometimes not even enough because you're celebrating someone's whole life. And how you condense it to 20 minutes to me is yeah. But you're talking about, you know, his mum and dad were there, so they spoke about his life as a child, and we went all through his life, but we didn't have to rush, which was brilliant, and it gave everybody the opportunity to speak. So yes, and there we go. Just a picture there, just an example of, you don't have to have the traditional black hearse. If you're a fan of any particular vehicle, you can have that. I've had people in motorcycles, tractors. We've had lots of different ways of bringing coffins into a service. But the whole point is that you can do it your way. But a service to me is something that should be absolutely unique. Like I say, just as unique as a person is.
Working as an independent funeral celebrant since 2016, and I trained with the Institute of Civil Celebrants, I think similarly to Anne-Marie. So I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail of the sort of things that Anne-Marie was mentioning. I understand from Sue that some time ago you had a talk by Jane Duncan Rogers of Before I Go Solutions.
Yeah.
And as you know, Jane is keen to get us all thinking about end-of-life plans. And she's got a workbook of practical questions to ask and answer before you die. And she's arranged these into sections, such as household and garden, which covers everything from your burglar alarm code to who your car mechanic is and who you might want to look after your pet. There are questions also about notifying friends and family, where to find legal documents such as your will and powers of attorney, thinking about financial practicalities, your last day's wishes, and finally, what do you want to happen to you after death, which is where a celebrant might be able to help you before you go. Of course, you might not be worried about any of these things because they won't matter once you're dead. But at the same time, you might worry about them. And if you address these things before you go, it gives you control and peace of mind. And at the same time, it will spare others from a lot of expense, maybe heartache, hassle, anxiety, questions. Some of the things that Anne-Marie mentioned when she was talking about planning. And I think that these questions are particularly important to those of us who are aging without children, giving us the opportunity to think about what we really want and what our last wishes might be. Oh, sorry about that. What do I want to happen with my body? There's only really time this afternoon to address these things quite briefly, but some options that you have. Either a funeral, cremation or burial, which we've already mentioned, a direct cremation, which would be unattended, and Anne-Marie went into a lot of detail there, no friends or family present, and this would keep the cost down and might appeal to anyone who doesn't want any fuss made after they've died. There's the option of a natural burial, which is an eco-friendly green option. You can be buried at sea. You don't need to have any maritime connections to choose that. Just find a funeral director who can help you with making the arrangements. Human composting. Now, this is where the body is gently transformed into soil. So it's broken down with organic material and like wood chips and straw for several weeks inside an enclosure until it becomes soil. There's resumation, which is a water cremation. I think it's quite popular in America and not widely known over here. It's advertised always as an environmentally sustainable option. The body is broken down by a combination of water and an alkali-based solution. So it's an alkaline hydrolysis, which doesn't sound particularly natural to me, and produces ashes at the end of the process. And you can have a DIY funeral where your family, friends and loved ones take over and do everything that the funeral director might otherwise do, with as little or as much input from a funeral director as you want. You might also like to think about whether or not you'd like a memorial service instead or after the funeral, a wake. Would you like your ashes scattered or interred, perhaps with another family member or a friend? And finally, you could have a living ceremony and celebrate your life with your family, friends and loved ones before you go. Okay, so working with a celebrant, how do you want to be remembered? That might be a consideration for you. Is there anyone that you particularly do or don't want at your funeral? And what tone would I like at my funeral? Is it a serious black occasion or something more like Louisa can offer, full of colour, laughter, music, and so on? And do you want a stone to mark your grave or any other semi-permanent memorial, such as a plaque on a bench at your favourite beauty spot? And what wording might you like on such a stone? Okay, I'm going to finish with a couple of poems which have been touched upon, and there are some wonderful examples out there, both long and short. So I thought I'd share a couple of my own shorter favourites and then one longer one. This is one by Joyce Grenfell, so I'll just be quiet and let you all, well, perhaps I'll read it out. You might not be able to see it. It's from Joyce by herself and her friends. If I should go before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone, nor when I'm gone speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well. And the second one is by Leo Marx. Apparently it was a poem code composed during the Second World War and designed to fool the Nazi cryptanalysts. And I like it because it's very simple and it connects with nature, so it's a lovely one for a burial. The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have of the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. A sleep I shall have, a rest I shall have, yet death will be but a pause, for the peace of my years in the long green grass will be yours and yours and yours. And finally, a longer one, which is too long to actually put on the slide. It's called The Dash by Linda Ellis, and it goes like this. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time they spent alive on earth. And now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love, and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a while. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? And that's where I'm going to finish. Thank you very much for listening.